We seriously thought that we would get away from any ideology or anything that is particularly downbeat in Doctor Who when Russell T Davies came back to the helm of the show. How very wrong we were. We thought that perhaps a rest from Russell T Davies over the last couple of weeks would be a change as good as a rest. However, I'm not so sure it has been. Whilst it is refreshing to have different writers, it's still full of stuff that doesn't need to be put into Doctor Who the way that it is being presented. A couple of weeks ago, we had Sharma Angel Warfall for The Well. She only seemed to have a very minimal amount of input because RTD seems to have written the majority of the script. Last week we had Pete McTighe or McT. Next week we have Juno Dawson. And this week we have Noah Ellams. Hello and welcome back to Chat About It, Don't Shout About It with me, Rachel, the Queen of the Woke, as crowned by one of my haters. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe to the channel, switch on the notification bell so that you know I am releasing another video. I'm on a mission to get to 2K. So can I do it? Thank you to everyone who's joined me already. I cannot run this channel without you. Please remember to keep it nice and respectful in the comments. Healthy debate is the best way forward. It is time to chat. So this week's story is the Doctor story. The story and the Engine is this week's story for Doctor Who, and it's written by Noah Ellams, who has a few writing for screen credits and has a predominant experience in writing plays and poems, but is apparently a very big fan of Doctor Who. There's a lot of things that happen in this story, so please do leave a comment below to the stuff that I will miss, because I will miss things out. I'm only one person making this review. It takes me a long time, and I'm sure that I'll cover a lot more in context tomorrow on the Sense Sphere. Please do also remember that if you like the Gatwood Doctor, that is absolutely fine. And if you like this era, that's also okay. We can all like something and all not like something and still have a very well-reasoned and coherent debate. This story is set in a barber shop. This is where the main piece of the story happens. The barber shop is in Lagos, Nigeria in Africa. 4 men and a barber are all appearing to wait for the man that they know as the Doctor. The Doctor lands in Lagos. He uses the Vindicator, and after a very quick reminder that the Doctor is now a stigmatized person and therefore does not belong in white populated countries so much anymore, Belinda decides that he can go to see his old friend Omo, who is the owner of the barbershop and the Doctor's friend. The Doctor discovers that he is missing with 3 other people. However, when he enters the shop, he discovers that they are all there. He's confused, naturally, as to why they are all missing on missing posters outside, but they're here inside the barbershop. The door does snap close behind him, and he is trapped inside with no way to get out, which causes the cloister bell to go off in the TARDIS. Or at least that's what I thought it was. It didn't sound like the cloister bell, but I'm guessing that it was. The Doctor also meets a lady called Abby. This lady he seems to recognise, and I will explain more about that later because this makes no sense whatsoever. She does, though, appear to definitely know who the Doctor is, because she gave him a look of absolute disgust and gave him quite a tut in a very rude way. The Doctor discovers that when the red light goes off in the barbershop, that means the machine has stopped moving, and one of them is required to sit in the barber's chair to tell a story and have their hair cut. The reason for this is because the power of words of the stories is what charges something called the story engine, and it keeps it moving. The Doctor tells his own story about Belinda, and it is powerful enough to charge it back up to full power. But this results in the Doctor believing that he has been double-crossed by his friend Omo as well. This is because Omo told the barber and his friends that the Doctor would have enough power in his stories to keep the machine moving. The Doctor, feeling betrayed and angry, starts to act a little bit reckless. He uses the sonic screwdriver to open the door, but before that, he reminds us that he is homeless and some kind of refugee. However, opening the door was a big mistake. The door shoots open, then they're almost sucked into the dimension outside of the door that houses the spider and the Nexus, which was previously called the World Wide Web. Yeah, clever. Belinda makes her way to the barber shop and finds the doctor, but not before she sees a little child that looks like a space baby of some description. Oh, yes. She joins the doctor in the barber shop, and we spend an awful lot of time talking. There's a lot of plot points and reveals that are made in this particular story. We also find out that Abby is a god, Abena. Abby was the daughter of Anansi. Yes, the doctor remembers her, and weirdly enough, this seems to be connected to the fugitive doctor whose adventures the doctor does not remember. But apparently, in this case, he does. It all comes flooding back to him that he's lost his bit. And Abby's mood with him is all because of him. We get a fleeting glimpse of the fugitive doctor as well. The barber says that he is the god of stories. He is Anansi, the man spider Saga, the Norse goddess Basset, and Dionysus, the Greek god of theatre, Loki, the god of mischief. However, the doctor does not believe him because apparently he's met all of these gods, and nor does Belinda. So the barber reveals the truth. Once they're done laughing at him, of course. The barber was once human. He is now no longer human. He is mortal. He was the one who told the stories of the gods and put their stories into books and attached it essentially to the human race. He makes the web. This is what made the god. He made it from the god's blood and essence. The gods used this web and they built upon it, making it bigger. And in the end, the gods took everything that the barber had worked on and he had no acknowledgement for it, for the work that he had done. The only thing that he was left with in this particular story was the story engine, and this is where he comes up with his plan for revenge. His goal was to collect stories. There's also references made to Lux and a space opera, which is likely to be the next story, the Intergalactic Song Contest, but I could be wrong. His mission was to kill the gods. Abena, or Abby, who had been working with the barber, was absolutely disgusted by this revelation because she is a god. So she decides that she is going to tell a story in order to power the machine. She tells the story of slaves and how they made their way to freedom by braiding maps into their hair. She does this whilst braiding a map into the doctor's hair. And this would take him to the heart of the shop, or the heart of the story engine. The doctor follows this map with Belinda to the center of the story engine, and it becomes his mission to put a stop to the story engine going to the gods. And, well, can the doctor save the day in this case? And shockingly, he does. I know. Can you believe what I just ended with? I ended the synopsis with, and shockingly, in this case, he does. This story has some good points and it has some very weak points and some points that are sort of in the middle. But I would like to talk about the ending before anything else. Over the last two series, we've had Russell T Davies mostly at the helm, with some guest writers coming in here and there, and the majority of the time the Doctor does not save the day. Inua Ellams is not a predominantly a screenwriter, so to speak. He is a huge fan of Doctor Who, so I'm told. So he is a person that is more well known for his poems and his plays rather than his screenwriting projects. And so taking him on to do this is a huge risk. And it makes you wonder if Inua is going to execute this really well with very little experience in this genre. Unfortunately, the other writers seem to have fallen into a common trope of not having the Doctor save the day and writing a very companion-centric story. In this case, that does not happen, shockingly. How they reach the ending is all through words and telling stories, is no real major sort of action, which is disappointing. However, in this case, it's the Doctor who realizes that he's going to need to tell a story in order to power the machine. And he does a very short one. And because he has all his other previous incarnations that have all these stories tied into him, he is one big story. It gives the machine way too much power. And of course, that is dangerous. I will give full credit here, and I am being very generous. But when the writing team consistently forgets that it's supposed to be the Doctor that saves the day, and then a writer with no experience writing sci-fi comes in and makes the Doctor the hero, no matter how flat it is. He showed you all up, no matter how unimaginative it was. He showed the Doctor solving the issue, even though he gets the hint from Abena about the map. He shows the Doctor leading Belinda to the heart of the story engine, following that map. He shows the Doctor figuring out what is going on at the centre with the story engine. He shows the Doctor telling Belinda to get out. Remember, in Rogue, he was too busy chasing Rogue to save Ruby. He also talks the barber down. The Doctor saves the gods and he saves everyone on the screen and the world. No matter what you think of the Gatwa Doctor, in this case, I think Unua was trying to paint him as the hero. And yes, it was one of those very rare instances where we have everybody lives in this story. And I can't remember the last time that we had one of those. And from time to time, I do like getting those. It's really quite nice sometimes to get those types of stories. However, I would prefer it if there really was more action, even in a everybody lives type of story. All you have to do is look at something like The Empty Child and the Doctor Dances, and you've got pretty much a good amount of action in that, even though everybody lives. And that's what this story is lacking. It has some action. However, I would say that I can tell that a playwright has written it. That sounds very rude. It really does. I am aware of that. I've studied many texts over the years, be it in a contextual form or in a performative form. There are a vast amount of plays that are very static, and they are done that way for a reason. Things like money, of course, naturally, or the fact that it's easier to keep it in one place because it helps enable the tension. Agatha Christie's The Mousetrap is a very good example of one of those types of plays. In fact, Agatha Christie's other plays also do something similar, and sometimes the logistics of moving a set around, particularly in theatres that are now listed buildings, can be a tricky one to also navigate. I wouldn't like to try too many set changes with something like the play that goes wrong, for instance, because everything is going wrong. You've got lots of stunts going on. This story is very wordy. It's almost too wordy. There were things that the story is doing in this that we could really do with seeing the action instead, I believe. For example, we have the Nexus and the giant spider. We don't really have too many shots with that. They're very minimal, very sparse. It's almost like they didn't have the money to do that. I wish we could have seen something more like that rather than talking. I do think that the spider could have looked a bit better in its design. You see, the reason why I think that we could have used the Nexus and the spider a lot more is because there was a point where the Doctor uses his sonic screwdriver, or shoe driver in this case, to open the door, and it sends the shop on its side. Well, it sends the performers on its side, and they're holding on for dear life as all this air travels through, and potentially they're going to be forced into the Nexus with the spider. I would have preferred it if the Doctor had let go, or one of the other characters like Omo had let go and been sucked into this Nexus, and the Doctor would have had to have gone and rescued him. It didn't have to be a very long sequence at all, so to speak. It just could have been a few minutes maximum, but because they wanted to dedicate the plot to other things, well, they just missed an opportune moment really to focus on putting the Doctor into some real jeopardy. Now, the effects when the Doctor opens the door are pretty good as well. Yes, I just say that it was an opportunity missed, but it was good, those effects. There was time dedicated to things in this story though that just really didn't need to be, in there. They were unwarranted, unneeded. Lecture without it being a direct lecture, so to speak. The bit in the TARDIS, there's a bit in the TARDIS and there's a bit in the shop as well. But let's talk about the TARDIS first because that's the most significant, I think. Well, the other bit's also significant, but this one is probably gaping in plot holes. So the Doctor has just done his Vindicator stuff and he's gone back to the TARDIS. It's at this point that he says to Belinda that he is an evolved life form. Now, I think that perhaps sometimes the Time Lords can be a little bit cocky and consider themselves to be high and mighty, but I would have never thought they would have ever considered themselves as an evolved life form. To me, that is not something the Doctor would say. It's almost an indirect way of saying, I'm just better than everyone else. Now, maybe I have missed something in the Doctor's history, but I have nothing in my memory that comes to mind him ever saying anything like that. But I could be wrong. There are so many stories out there. He also says to Belinda, it's the first time I've had this black body. But here in Africa, in that barber shop, I'm accepted. I'm able to forget. This is also after he says to Belinda that he is treated differently now. So essentially, Africa has become his safe place because of racism. It's a way of saying that he is treated as one of their own. It's a sense of belonging, I guess you could say. It's that moral of sticking to your own race and belonging to your own race. Which is kind of ironic considering that the two main actors have family from different countries and so does the writer. I lived in Japan for 5 years and I consider that my second home, and I wouldn't live there again because I like doing what I do now in this country. But when I was over there, I didn't need to find a sense of belonging. I didn't need to stick to my own race. What would be the point of me moving to a different country just to stick to my own race? I integrated with members of society. I didn't stigmatize myself. I didn't segregate myself. What exactly would that achieve? Absolutely nothing. Now, before I address his statement about the first time that he had a black body, I will also just point out that they tried to hint at the fact that the Doctor was perhaps some kind of refugee. Now, I am aware of the writer's quote about the Doctor being a refugee. I never really interpreted the Doctor deciding to leave his own planet as a refugee status. I didn't see it that way. They did imply it here, though, because he has an argument with Omo. He says to Omo, you plan this, Omo, to which Omo replies, I have to get these men home. And the Doctor says, and because I have no home, I'm what? Expendable? To which Omo replies, their families need them. And so the Doctor says, and I have none, so I don't matter. He also later makes a point of saying, I thought it was a home for me, it was safe. And that was referring to the barber shop where he was accepted because he is so segregated. And by the way, I'm not saying that any of these people who worked on this particular story have not received racism. I'm sure that they have. It's just that I've never seen the Doctor this way, and I never will, even if he is played by a black man. And before anyone suggests that I am racist, whilst I was surprised that they were changing the Doctor's race, it's not affected my opinion of the stories whatsoever, okay? Now, going back to his statement about this is the first time that he has a black body, someone get the script writers a continuity checker. He has, at this point, even though he doesn't know anything about his past, if we're going by the definition of the current mess that is Doctor Who, he has at this point met the fugitive Doctor. So therefore, he knows this is not the first time he has had a black body. Go figure. Okay? Just saying. Check the script. And also, whilst I think about this is a family TV show. We want people to be accepting of everyone. So why are we making stories about race? Why are we drawing attention to it? Yes, we can do a pretty decent historical educational story about race, but in this day and age, in the year that it was set, even which was 2019, people are far much more accepting and we are all integrated as a society. I just find that interesting. So, aside from the indirect stick to your own race lecture that we got, this story also seemed to be reflective of things that happen in real life. For example, when we go to the hairdressers or the barber shop, one thing that we all do is tell stories, and that's what brings us together. We unite in telling stories, words have power, and really, this is what makes it all wordy because, in order to keep the story engine moving, they must all tell stories. And I also think that this is the biggest letdown of it. What wasn't the biggest letdown, though, was the surprise appearance. Well, I say surprise, I know it was rumored there was going to be references of the fugitive doctor. I don't accept the fugitive doctor as canon. I just don't. William Hartnell is and always will be the first doctor, no matter what Chibbs has done. When she came back, though, that one tiny segment that upstaged Gatwa immediately. I don't think that Joe Martin even intended to. I just think that it happened naturally. There was enough power behind what she was saying in order to make me believe that she was more convincing than Shooty as the doctor. And I'm not saying he is bad, by the way. I'm just believe that he was miscast as the doctor. His acting choices in this were very questionable. Whilst he, in many respects, at certain points, is also better than what he has been. The issue that I have is that his crying and where it's going to happen is now predictable. This is, how I guessed that he was going to cry was when these characters, Omo, Rashid, Tunde, and Obayama, were telling their stories of how they were drawn into the situation that was going on at the barber shop. And lo and behold, he cries. Totally saw that coming. Predictable now. I will say that his accent kept changing a fair bit in this as well. Just as a side note, I wish he would just choose one accent and stick to it. Now, here's where we get a plot hole. I already mentioned earlier that the Doctor appears to have forgotten the fact that he has met the fugitive Doctor. Or at least people working behind the scenes seem to have forgotten that. Because he says, "This is the first time I have had a black body." Then he suddenly remembers, here is the character Abby. Her real name is Abena. It is implied that the fugitive doctor had met this character. However, if we go by the fake established canon that I don't consider to be canon, then surely this is incorrect. Right? He should not have had any form of memory whatsoever of Abena because the Jodie Whittaker doctor has no recollection of her memories at all. So unless they've all suddenly just come back to him with no explanation whatsoever, that seems to be something that has slipped through the sidelines here. So unless there's going to be a big payoff for that in this series, which I don't have a reason to believe that there will be, there's no reason for us to assume that the Doctor has any of his memories that he has supposedly has lost. What we will get, though, is a resolution to all the business that has been going on with the gods, because, like I said earlier, there was something pretty big made in plot references here going on to the overarching story. We see Mrs. Flood. She's back. There's going to be a resolution to her character very soon. Unfortunately, though, they brought back the bright and jovial Mrs. Flood, which we have seen a lot of throughout the previous series and partly in this series. They didn't go for the darker version. I really do wish we had a dark delivery for Mrs. Flood in this one. I think the darker delivery suits this character more. And to be fair, Anita Dobson, in my honest opinion, is much better at the dark characters than she is the bright and jovial ones. Well, I say that. I just think it's a forte because it just gives her an elevated status and she can play off that. It's a lot easier when that happens. Now, we know that she's going to be some kind of antagonist. Could she be the boss that was mentioned in the Star Beast? People are also suggesting that she is the god of stories. However, I think this story was intended to serve that purpose. In this case, I think she does have some connection to the gods because there was a reference made to the next story in this one. I believe there was. So hopefully there will be a big payoff with Mrs. Flood coming. I'm hoping that she's going to be the main antagonist for this series, unlike what they did with Susan Twist. You can't have a character that's gone on throughout this long with 2 series without a big payoff, can you really? So I think the barber was, well, he was not essentially a god, but I think he is a servant of the god of stories, so to speak. Arion Baccarat, I think I've said that right. He plays a barber in this one. He was good. He was very good. I would say that the acting in this was really good all round. It was a pretty strong cast. And it had to be because it was so wordy. I really do think that they needed the word lord in this story in order to make it a lot more interesting. Word lord is from the Big Finish stories, just for reference there. I think Inoue was probably commissioned to make a lot of references in this story to tie in plot points or serve as a mid tie-in for the beginning of Act 2, so to speak. However, because of his experience as working as a playwright, it's so static and so full of words that the important key points probably were missed by a lot of people. I was looking after my cousin's dog in the morning when I first watched it. So I watched it a second time round to make sure I got absolutely everything. I feel like there were a lot of things that in this that were potentially going to come back to play, but I think I would have preferred all of those key points or these references mentioned throughout the 4 stories that we got so far, rather than trying to feed it into one story. And I think the reason why this is not a good thing, having it all in one story. Do you understand what I'm meaning? So basically, everything that was mentioned in this story should have been spread a bit more throughout rather than trying to put it into one story. You get what I'm saying? Okay. I always say that Doctor Who should come in above the viewer's head wherever possible. And if we don't get it the first time round, we might get it the second time round, or maybe never at all. And that's okay. This story does do that. However, I don't think it was the right approach to do it this way with so many words. I think it makes the story a little bit convoluted because they overcomplicate something that didn't need to be overcomplicated. It can be a little bit out of reach with this one, but I also think it has to be obtainable if it fits key elements of the finale. That being said, if you paid attention to the words, I like the concepts and the ideas that were being said. I wish, though, that we had got to see more of them on the screen. I really do. I like the idea that the barber is no longer human. He, in his own right, technically is a god because he is mortal. So technically, he could be the god of stories. I like the concept of him being behind the god's power. I really do like the fact that he made his web using the god's blood and essence. I think we should have seen that though. Him extracting the god's blood or their essence in order to make his nexus and his web and create his story engine. We could have seen all of that. We could have seen him collecting the stories. We could have seen him putting the books together. There are so many things that we could have seen on the screen when the words were being said to us. We could have really had those visuals to enhance that storytelling. However, it just remained pretty static. That could have been a real opportunity for the writer to have explored Lagos in Nigeria. The reason why I say that is because I like the idea of a story being set in Africa. I've got no issue with that. I do like that story. I also like the fact that the Nexus is a space-time compressor that was built into the door. The link to it. We get this one bit at the end where the spider looks like it's coming through this time-space compressor into the real world. I would have loved that for that to have come into the real world and cause some mass devastation and really have the Doctor save it. But again, it was one of those concepts and ideas that was just not executed very well. And it is a common theme through the last 2 series. The visuals were okay in this one. I really liked the animations that they had in this. I think there was a bit too much time dedicated to those said animations. The window where those animations were happening they also house part of the opening titles. I wish they hadn't done that. They should have just cut straight to the opening titles. We could have done with perhaps one animation less in this one and a focus on action. One thing that really made me laugh in this was that they went for that type of mysterious shot of who is the bad guy, where they do that sort of purposeful shot of the hands like they do with Davros and and all of that. However, they did go for that, and just a few shots later he was revealed to be an ordinary man. That made me laugh. I was expecting something way more horrific than that. The effects of the TARDIS when the cloister bell starts going off, it's about time that we got to see something like that, the TARDIS being used efficiently. They flash red. Thank goodness. They actually do something that is convenient with the TARDIS. They signify that the Doctor is in jeopardy. We all know really that he's not in any jeopardy at all because all of his jeopardy was removed unceremoniously. However, we are led to believe that it is some form of jeopardy. But it's about time that they start using that TARDIS because they spent all that money and they got this massive set built and it's barely being used aside perhaps for what we got in the last story. I also think that we've got a return of the space babies. Yay! There is a point where Belinda sees a space baby, or what I believe to be a space baby. Please, no more space babies. We don't need Look Who's Talking 3.0, but I do think we're going to get their return. Would you believe me if I told you, shock horror, that we did not have a companion-centric story as well? Yeah. There was a bit that was dedicated to her in the storytelling. The Doctor tells her story in order to power the machine. However, she was not the main focus. It was like a minute, maybe not even that. In fact, she didn't serve any relevance to the plot at all, really. She was just there to ask questions, I suppose. And thank goodness for that, because I find Belinda to not be a particularly nice companion. Now, I know that's probably because she doesn't want to be in the TARDIS. She wants to go home. Fair enough. However, I think that even with that, they could try and make her a little bit nicer. There were companions in the past that did not want to travel with the Doctor. That's nothing new. However, they were nice. And currently, at the moment, Belinda is just a strong, independent woman that does not seem to be what I would call approachable or even genuine. She is supposed to be our perspective, our vision into the TARDIS. She is our thought process into the TARDIS. And it's just not coming off that way. I'm genuinely shocked that a playwright has come in and he's made the Doctor not only save the day, but not bothered to make the focus on the companion. And he's made a second to the Doctor. He almost reverted back to, what's this, Doctor? Why is that, Doctor? He didn't give her much development at all. She didn't have much to say either. She did have a bit where she cottoned on to the end where the Doctor implies that he's going to be putting too much power with the story that was told into the story engine. But other than that, she does nothing. Absolutely nothing. I also do not know how I feel about the fact that there's probably going to be a god as the main antagonist, the main boss. There were so many references made to the gods here, and the Doctor says that he's met them, which is strange because I didn't think that the Doctor would believe in that because he is a man of science and knowledge and what he does. Well, not this version, but the Doctor does respect other people's cultures and other people's beliefs. He also has reasoning behind his doubts, but in this case, he has met all of the gods, apparently, that were mentioned in this. So we have Anansi, the man spider saga, the Norse goddess, Basset Dionysus, the Greek god, or theatre Loki, the god of mischief. So we should have really had those stories where he meets those gods in order for context to be added. So then the Doctor does something that I believe to be very undoctor-like after this. The Doctor has cottoned on to the fact that the barber has said that he was all of these gods, and this was a lie because he supposedly has met them. Instead of calling him a liar or addressing the situation calmly like he perhaps normally would have done, he falls about into fits of hysterics. Yep, into fits of hysterics. It's almost mocking him. The barber is very serious about his situation, and the Doctor is mocking him with laughter. Since when does the Doctor do something like that in such a tense situation? It's at this point, normally, where he goes into his most dangerous tone, in my opinion. Now, that's not the actor's fault. This is on the writers, the script editors, the continuity checkers, the showrunner, the director. I can't imagine this would have been an acting choice in this case because they dedicate quite a lot of time to the laughter. Now, I do say also that the Doctor does pretty much figure out things for himself after he is given a clue, because right up until that point, he hasn't figured anything out. Abby tells him by telling him a story, and she puts cornrows into his hair, and these cornrows are braided in patterns, which we discovered to be a map. Now, I did think that was interesting, and it made a reference to slavery, which we really did not need. However, in this case, it was one of those few incidences where it didn't necessarily stop the story from going forward. It was to serve as a plot device. And it was happening while she was braiding his hair. And she was also telling the viewer that this was part of the solution. If they were going to use that as the plot point that gets the Doctor to where he needed to be, I think they needed to make a bigger deal out of it, because really this is where the resolution is coming from. They should have started this a little bit earlier. Yeah, they did not need to make the reference about slavery, though. I honestly think if they want to go full on and explore the slavery history, the history of the slave trade, then they should do a time traveling period story and explore it then and tell us and show us the historical side of it rather than telling us the history of it. I quite often feel that in Doctor Who in recent years, they just shove it in for the sake of shoving it in, and they are saying it rather than approaching it from a different method. The Doctor solving it by telling a story really wasn't the most epic thing that you could possibly do. I would have loved to have seen a big showdown between him and the spider rather than him zapping it with the sonic shoe driver. I think that this story was an overall wordy mess. It didn't need to be done this way. I can imagine that perhaps a lot of people switched off. In fact, I have had some people tell me that they did switch off, and one person did tell me that they were not going to be doing a rewatch because it was too boring for them. I get it though, because we can have chatty stories of Doctor Who, but we've got to have action mixed in with it at the same time. And whilst I do feel like there was an intent to do that, there wasn't enough of it. The things that were mentioned in this story to do with the plot, some of those could have been introduced a lot earlier, and then some of these are probably serving as an interim towards moving the story onward. That's not an easy task to give a scriptwriter who has not experienced any form of screenplay writing in science fiction. Overall, I give it a 4 out of 10. Apparently, this is very much like his Barber Shop Chronicles play. So I'm going to see if I can get a copy of that from the library. I'm going to read it and take a look at it, and I think I'll let you know if there are any similarities about that or not. So let me know what you think. Chat about it, don't chat about it. Like, share, subscribe to the channel, switch on the notification bells so that you know I am releasing another video. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you tomorrow. Bye bye.